Welcome, everyone. Today, we're tackling a topic that really challenges some common assumptions. We're looking at the unique, quite complex challenges faced by Black millennial South Africans, particularly those who've, reached middle or even upper income levels. Our deep dive today draws on some really powerful insights from excerpts from Black millennial South Africans, apartheid's lingering shadows. And this isn't just about looking at economic success stories, it's really about understanding how South Africa's its profound socio-political history,
Hmm,
especially the really pervasive, lingering effects of apartheid, continues to deeply shape the present-day lives of this specific group.
exactly. And our mission today really is to pull out the most vital nuggets of knowledge from these sources. We want to help you, our listener, grasp the interconnected challenges they face: financial, mental, physical health, and crucially, why these challenges are so deeply rooted in the country's past. We'll definitely uncover some surprising facts and try to contextualize things that might seem, at first glance, a bit counterintuitive for a population that's achieving economic success.
Okay, so let's dig into this. The sources, they immediately point out that even for these Black millennials in the middle to upper income brackets, significant challenges don't just disappear. What's really striking, I think, is that despite this upward mobility, they're still profoundly impacted by the vast wealth and income inequality inherited directly from apartheid.
Precisely. That's the core insight here. These aren't just, individual struggles people are going through. They're deeply intertwined with this complex history of systemic inequality and, frankly, trauma. And while the black middle class has certainly grown, which is important, it's still playing significant catch-up compared to white counterparts.
Mhm.
The sources make it, well, undeniably clear that the journey towards, let's say, holistic well-being for these individuals is uniquely demanding because of this historical context.
Okay, let's pivot a bit to the financial pressures then. The sources kept bringing up something called black tax.
Hmm.
For our listener, what exactly does that term mean? How does it actually play out in people's lives?
Right, black tax. It's a truly defining concept in this context. It basically signifies this expectation, often unspoken but very real, that successful black individuals will financially support their extended family members. Relatives who were historically disadvantaged by apartheid policies and, importantly, continue to face systemic barriers to really participating in the economy.
Wow, so it's not just helping out occasionally.
No, not at all. This isn't just small contributions here and there. It significantly reduces their own disposable income, and it profoundly hinders their personal ability to build wealth, even when they're earning a good salary.
That sounds like an immense, just ongoing burden. And it's not the only financial pressure they're under, is it? The sources also mention high living costs and significant debt.
Indeed. South Africa has been really grappling with persistent inflation and high interest rates.
Hmm.
And that squeezes household budgets relentlessly, puts pressure on everyone, but particularly those juggling these extra responsibilities. Many people, including these millennials, are constantly worried about missing bill payments or loan repayments. And while some are, commendably proactive in trying to pay down debt, a really significant portion still relies heavily on credit, which unfortunately often leads to widespread over-indebtedness. It's a real cycle.
And what's particularly compelling, I found, is how this connects back to job insecurity. Even if someone has impressive qualifications, there's still this real fear of unemployment, especially when you look at South Africa's incredibly high youth unemployment rates. How does that then connect to the pressure to support family?
Well, it raises a really fundamental question, doesn't it? How do you build personal stability? How do you secure your own future
Mm.
when you're simultaneously trying to support multiple households, often with your own employment feeling, well, tenuous? The sources indicate that even those earning quite well in those higher income brackets can feel this profound sense of precarity. It's like walking a tightrope.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And if we connect this to the bigger picture, the historical factors are undeniable. Think about things like the discriminatory 1913 Land Act, which basically dispossessed black individuals of land and all the restrictions placed on skilled labor for black people. These things created a staggering wealth gap over generations. And that history continues to limit access to things like generational wealth, which could otherwise provide a crucial safety net or, opportunities for investment.
Okay, so we've kind of dissected the financial burden, which is clearly immense. But when you're carrying that kind of economic pressure, and it's often linked directly to generations of disadvantage, well, it almost certainly takes a psychological toll. What do the sources tell us about intergenerational trauma? What does that actually mean for millennials today?
That's a very important question. The psychological effects of apartheid. I mean, we're talking systemic oppression, extreme violence, the forced disruption of families. They haven't just vanished. They've been profoundly passed down through generations. It's almost like a living psychological inheritance. So Black millennials experience these residual effects, and they can manifest as things like pervasive anxiety, depression, other mental health conditions. Studies consistently show that Black South Africans often experience higher levels of psychological distress. And this is due to the cumulative impact of past traumatic events combined with ongoing daily discrimination. It all contributes to a state of chronic stress.
It sounds like an incredibly heavy, almost invisible weight they're carrying. And then the sources bring up this idea of the model minority burden. What does that entail for this particular group?
You've really hit on a crucial point there. For those individuals who've managed to achieve middle or upper income status, there's often this immense pressure, not just to succeed personally, which is hard enough, but also to uplift their entire families, their communities. It involves carrying the weight of trying to break these long-standing cycles of poverty and disadvantage.
Like they're the ones who made it out.
Exactly. And this model minority burden, as the sources call it, significantly contributes to their stress levels and often leads to burnout. And what's fascinating, or perhaps disturbing, is the direct, undeniable link here. The financial pressures we just talked about, the black tax, the debt, the job insecurity, these are major, major contributors to these mental health issues. It's all connected.
So it really sounds like a vicious cycle. And even if you are financially better off, getting access to quality mental health care isn't necessarily a given.
That's another critical point, yes. Despite the high prevalence of mental illness across the population, a vast majority of South Africans simply do not receive adequate care. And this is largely due to, well, historical underinvestment in mental health services, which is a direct legacy of apartheid planning. Plus, there's inadequate infrastructure, severe staff shortages, and importantly, pervasive societal stigma around mental health.
Right, the stigma.
Yeah. So even for those who might have the financial resources to seek private care, these systemic issues still pose significant barriers. And finding culturally appropriate care that truly understands their unique experiences and historical context, can be alarmingly difficult.
Okay, moving on slightly, our sources also delve into physical health. How does apartheid's enduring legacy actually physically show up in health disparities for this generation?
Well, the apartheid policies quite deliberately led to severely underfunded and understaffed healthcare facilities for Black South Africans. It was systemic. This created deeply entrenched health disparities that, unfortunately, persist today. While access has certainly improved since the end of apartheid, that historical disadvantage continues to manifest. We see it in higher rates of certain chronic conditions and generally poorer overall health outcomes within these communities compared to others.
And the chronic stress we talked about earlier from all those financial worries, psychological pressures, discrimination, does that actually translate into physical illness?
Absolutely. There's a strong body of evidence showing this. The body really does keep the score, as they say. That kind of chronic stress, born from relentless financial pressures, maybe daily microaggressions or overt discrimination, plus the weight of intergenerational trauma, it directly contributes to a whole range of serious physical health issues. We're talking about higher risks for conditions like hypertension, heart disease, even a weakened immune system. It's a physiological response to the ongoing impact of that history.
The sources also mention the rise of so-called lifestyle diseases like obesity and diabetes. How does that fit into the picture for this specific group?
That's an interesting layer. As individuals move into these middle and upper income brackets, there can be a natural tendency sometimes to adopt more sedentary lifestyles, maybe related to office jobs, and experience shifts in dietary patterns, perhaps more processed foods. However, it's not quite that simple. Even with a higher income, actual access to safe spaces for physical activity or access to genuinely nutritious, affordable food can still be a significant challenge.
Especially depending on where they live.
Exactly, particularly in urban areas or townships that were historically neglected under apartheid planning. So income alone doesn't solve the access issue. It's about the environment, too.
And South Africa, the sources say, faces a triple burden of disease. What does that actually mean for this group who might, as you said, have better private healthcare access potentially?
Right, the triple burden. It's a term used to describe the situation where a country is simultaneously dealing with. One, high rates of communicable diseases like HIV, AIDS, and TB, which are still very widespread in South Africa. Two, a rise in non-communicable diseases, or NCDs, think diabetes, heart disease, cancers. And three, a persistent high level of injury-related disorders from accidents or violence,
So all three at once.
all three hitting the population simultaneously. Now, what's perhaps counterintuitive here for the group we're discussing is that even as their personal focus might shift towards managing those NCDs, those lifestyle diseases, because they have maybe better resources, they're still living within a broader society heavily impacted by the other burdens, especially communicable diseases. The prevalence of HIV and PV in the wider population inevitably impacts their communities, their families, their workplaces. It highlights that health, in the South African context, is undeniably a collective burden.
So individual success doesn't fully insulate them.
Precisely. Their individual access to, say, private health care doesn't completely shield them from these pervasive societal health challenges. The public system serving the majority remains strained, and that affects everyone indirectly.
Okay, so bringing all these threads together, the financial, the mental, the physical, what does this all mean when we tie it directly back to the socio-political history of South Africa? The sources aren't just saying apartheid is like one factor among many. They really emphasize its profound role in exacerbating every single one of these challenges.
This is really the critical synthesis, the main takeaway. Apartheid wasn't just a bad period. It was a deliberate, systematic machine. It was designed specifically to dispossess Black South Africans of land, of resources, of economic opportunities. It didn't just create a wealth gap by accident. It purposefully built ingrained poverty into the very fabric of the society. And that black tax we spent time on, it's a direct, often agonizing consequence of this historical economic dispossession. It wouldn't exist in the same way without that history.
And those structural inequalities you mentioned earlier, how do they keep persisting even after apartheid officially ended?
Well, think about the segregated education system under apartheid. The discriminatory labor laws that reserved skilled jobs for whites. The way cities and towns were physically designed spatial planning to keep races separate and disadvantaged Black communities. All these things created incredibly deep, embedded structural inequalities. So even now, with formal equality enshrined in law, these historical structures continue to manifest. You see it in ongoing disparities in job opportunities, in access to genuinely quality education, and just in the sheer availability of resources and infrastructure within different communities. The playing field is still far, far from level.
It sounds like the psychological wounds, too, run incredibly deep, maybe beyond just individual experiences of trauma.
They absolutely do. The sheer dehumanizing and oppressive nature of the apartheid system inflicted profound psychological wounds on individuals and on the collective psyche. And these wounds continue to echo across generations. They manifest in those persistent mental health challenges we discussed, impacting things like resilience, social trust, and overall well-being. And, adding insult to injury, the pre-existing lack of adequate mental health care infrastructure itself, a legacy of apartheid's priorities, makes healing from these wounds incredibly difficult. It compounds the problem.
Right. And the health system fragmentation you mentioned, that also sounds like a direct result of apartheid policies, making it harder to get proper care even now.
Precisely. Apartheid deliberately created a fragmented and profoundly unequal healthcare system, a first-world system for whites, and a vastly under-resourced one for everyone else. And even with significant reforms since 1994, the legacy of that chronic underinvestment in public health, particularly for Black communities, lingers powerfully. It means that accessing comprehensive care, especially preventative care, can still be incredibly difficult. And this is particularly true for the very conditions often linked to chronic stress and historical disadvantage that disproportionately affect this group we're focusing on.
And finally, the sources seem to highlight the social fabric itself. They suggest that while interdependence, supporting family is a valuable cultural norm, the extreme financial burden it places on successful millennials today feels like a direct consequence of a system that intentionally impoverished the majority of the population.
That's a really compelling point they make. It shows how traditional African norms of interdependence and communal support, which are, in many ways, positive and foundational to community life, become almost overwhelmingly burdensome when they're combined with the extreme unnatural financial pressures that resulted directly from systemic historical disadvantage. It starkly illustrates how the past isn't really past. It doesn't just linger. It actively forces an immense reliance on the relatively few who manage to achieve upward mobility. It creates this almost impossible tightrope walk for them, caught between cultural expectations and the harsh economic realities shaped by history.
Wow. We've definitely taken a deep dive today. It's covered a lot of ground looking into these unique and profound challenges faced by Black millennial South Africans, specifically those in middle to upper income brackets. It seems undeniably clear that these aren't just isolated individual struggles. They're deeply, deeply rooted in the complex, lingering, and, as you said, pervasive impacts of apartheid.
Yeah, and if we try to connect this to the bigger picture, outside of just South Africa, it really profoundly highlights how historical systemic inequalities, whether they're economic, social, or psychological, can cast these incredibly long shadows across generations. They influence almost everything from an individual's financial stability day to day, right through to their long-term mental and physical well-being, and often in ways that are maybe unseen or unacknowledged by wider society, but are very deeply felt by those living with that legacy.
So, for you, our listener, reflecting on all this, it really raises an important question to consider, I think. In any society where historical injustices are this deeply embedded, how can their echoes truly be addressed and dismantled? Is it actually enough to just change policies on paper, or are more specific actions, perhaps fundamental shifts in societal perspective and understanding, necessary? What does it really take to bridge these historical divides and ensure genuine well-being for all members of a society, especially for those still carrying the tangible weight of the past? Something to maybe ponder.